Hello there. So today I'm going to talk some more about the astrology of the agriculture course, Dr. Steiner's agriculture course. And one of the things in astrology that we use is that the beginning moment of any event or situation or person really tells us a story about that individuality, as it were, who they are, what their characteristics are, and therefore how they will unfold, how the events and situations will unfold. In regards to that, we can therefore look at the agriculture course and the beginning of that course being the 7th of June, 1924. And based on Peter Selig's book, we can hear that it was around 11 o'clock in the morning that these courses would take place. So we can look at that chart and start to have a look and see what's happening. However, before I do that, I think we should just get a little bit of common context of how we see what biodynamics is and the worldview biodynamics uses, and take it on from there. So we can start here, and we can just have a look at this picture for a minute. And the worldview Rudolf Steiner gives us is really based around the energetic activities that he sees in our environment. And of course, this is all built upon the very real astronomy of our environment. And so if we start, from the Earth, what we can see, of course, is the Earth. But around the Earth, we have this atmosphere that is supporting life. Now, one of the real features of this atmosphere is of course, it's 20% oxygen, and that this oxygen has become liberated into the atmosphere by living beings. And so, the blue-green algae began at the ocean surface, and this started liberating oxygen. And it's created this environment that life forms can live within. We can say, of course, life forms come from a duality of male and female, and that this exists within this atmosphere to give us these physical bodies. So the atmosphere that carries all this life activity, and of course it has the electromagnetic Schaumann resonance running at 7.8 hertz, which is the same as what human beings run at. So we can see this direct connection between the energetic activity of the atmosphere and the life-supporting activities of the atmosphere for us. Now, once we leave the atmosphere, we come into the solar system and all the other planets. And then, of course, beyond our solar system is the realm of the stars. That is the galaxy. And then beyond the galaxy is actually a whole lot more galaxies. However, our galaxy is our sort of local, organized, spherical being that we live within. So we can look at these real things. And so the top left picture sort of gives us the same story that I've just said. And then we can define that a little bit in the second story. And this is where we have the galaxy with the world spirit being that purple picture. The world astral is the solar system, the blue world etheric, green atmosphere. And then we have the life forms, which is, of course, the physical world, physical activity, and then the duality, and then the earth. So these 6 layers are the reality that we live within. These aren't made up. They're not make-believe. There's nothing to have faith in. These are electromagnetic realities that we exist within. Now, the bottom picture is an interesting one, just while we're sort of going past here, because of course the second picture is what's there. It is just the picture of what's there. But of course, once things start moving, they start causing this electromagnetic polarization. And we can see in Dr. Steiner's 1922 lectures, October 1922, Fundamentals of Anthroposophic Medicine, and the other one given about a week after that, that he talked about the way that the energetic activity is polarized. And we get this picture here of the world spirit in opposition to the world physical, world etheric opposition to world astral. And then, of course, in between those those spaces, we get these internal activities, so that we get this dynamic sort of picture of an octagon gyroscope that is created by movement. And we also, have to consider that. Now, just to get a bit of a handle on the planets for us to use, because we're going to be talking about that quite a lot. And this little chart here is an organization of the planets according to thinking, feeling, and willing. And then we, of course, go out from the Earth, and we have the first lot of planets that are considered sort of personal, unconscious activities. And then we move to the next layer out, which is where we as individuals start to interact with the world and other people. And so we have this personal conscious sphere. And then, of course, we then interact with the whole of humanity. And this is where we have the spirit layer of the galaxy moving into the solar system. And so this is where we have this collective unconscious sphere before we come to the sun, which of course is us, the spirit being. Now, there is another sphere beyond the collective unconscious, which is where this astral sphere sort of works into the spirit sphere, as it were. And this is where we get this other layer called the collective conscious. Now, in occult science and in some other lectures, he does mention this other layer of these three stages that are beyond spirit man, beyond Pluto. And so I've been able to incorporate that into a 12-planet system. Now, what we get here is that in the thinking, feeling, and willing, we have this process where Mercury is our opinions, our thoughts. And then when we come to share those with other people, this is where we get Jupiter. And so this governs sort of a secondary education, but it also governs where we start sharing ideas with other people. So this is education and travel and interaction with other cultures and so on. Now, the next layer, the collective unconscious layer of thinking, is really where we open ourselves up to this great big energetic Akashic record, as it were, in the Earth's magnetic field. And this can feed information back to us. So at the Uranus level, we can ask a question and we get the answer from the universe. It comes from the environment. Now, the feeling does a very similar process to what we've just said, in that the moon is our personal emotions and the things that allow us to feel personally secure. Venus is where we start emotionally interacting with other people. And of course, this is where we have relationships showing up. But it's also a non-verbal artistic expression carried out with Venus as well. Now, Neptune is then where we interface emotionally with the collective, and again, we're being able to be open to these impressions, these emotional impressions, and this shows up as a psychicness, and you know. Now, these Uranus and Neptune, I use different terms to what Rudolf Steiner does. He uses imagination for Uranus and inspiration for Neptune, whereas I switch those around. I find imagination is an emotional, imaginative, pictorial, dreamy state, which is very much more Neptune. But that doesn't matter. It's just use of words. It's the same activity. Pluto, of course, is the collective unconscious activity of the will, which starts off with Mars being our personal activities and our personal willful actions that we want to take. Saturn is where life experience comes in and starts to temper that very young male Marsy energy to make things happen and get things to manifest. And then Pluto is where the collective forces, so very big forces beyond your control, work into your life and have impact, but they are also forces that get the existing structures and alter those, change those. Now, all of this is dependent upon our spirit and how our spirit works with all of these different activities. Now, this, of course, is what we look at in a birth chart. Now, I thought it would be an interesting exercise for us to just run through Rudolf Steiner's birth chart, to get a picture of who he is and what the influences were around the time of the agriculture course, but also just to give us an example. It's like here's a little training lesson in the process that we're going to use when we come to the agriculture course. Now, I don't want to make a big deal out of this, so we'll go through relatively quickly. So what we're looking at in this picture here is Rudolf Steiner's birth chart for the 25th of February, 1861. I do believe this is the appropriate birth chart, not the 27th. However, this chart does come with its own difficulties. Not much changes in the 2 days. The moon moves a little bit, and that is actually quite a big thing. But we have to deal with what we've got, and so here's the 25th. Now, the way we look at these charts is that right in the middle, that's where the Earth is. And we look out from the Earth and we just look at the positions of the planets, which is on the outside, there. And then those lines, they are telling us about the different relationships between the planets. And the red lines, so from a musical point of view, we can look at the harmonic resonances of these interactions. And so where we put a 30-degree division or its multiples on a circle, then we get the positive, mostly positive relationships between the planets. It's a third harmonic. And the fourth harmonic being a 45-degree segmenting, this brings about a tension, just as we have in the fourth harmonic in music. So in astrology, the fourth harmonic has this tense, difficult qualities about them. And then these are the blue lines in this chart. And then the light blue lines that are here are the fifth harmonic. And these are very, very positive influences in a person's psychology, even though it seems when it comes to the weather, these particular aspects tend to create very stormy situations. So when we're looking at this picture, of course, the horizon line, which runs across the horizontal, we're looking from a northern hemisphere perspective, and so we're looking to the south, and so the horizon line has the eastern horizon on the left-hand side. And so what we can see here is that Rudolf Steiner has an ascendant of about 9 degrees Scorpio. And so from there we can see that the midheaven, or the zenith, is placed up there at 22, 23 degrees Leo, and that Jupiter is sitting right nearby. And just as we go through here, this is a very positive indicator of success in one's life. And being in the 9th house, the house of education, it does say success as an educator. Now, there's lots of ways of approaching a birth chart here. And I think at this point, we should just sort of have a look at the major influences of the sun and the moon and the ascendant. And his sun is in Pisces. Now, Pisces is a fairly dreamy, spiritual, altruistic, compassionate sign. And so the moon in Pisces does give him a tendency towards a mystical approach to life, that wants to make everything better for everybody. Now, the moon in Virgo, which is opposite the sun in Pisces, this is, of course, just after full moon he was born. And this in itself is a little bit problematic or difficult, in that the Virgo is very concerned with detail and precision and having everything in its right place. However, the moon is, in a sense, quite weak in this chart, quite weakly placed. Interestingly, we don't hear much about his mother, because the moon is mother, and we don't hear much about her. But this, also influences the women in his life, of which there were a lot of women. And we need to look at that picture a little bit more, really. Nevertheless, the moon in Virgo gives a love of precision. Whether he can actually achieve that precision or not is an interesting point of that opposition with the sun in Pisces. Now, the Scorpio rising gives him an intensity in his presentation and passion, quite possibly. And because the rising planet is Venus, it does suggest that he will be a very pleasant person and would like to come across in a very social and pleasant manner. However, as we'll see, there's a couple of influences here that make him a little bit irascible. So the best way to look at all the conversations going on in a birth chart is to separate them out into their various structures, because where you see the lines sort of joining up, these are one conversation. There might be 3 or 5 planets, but they're all just in one conversation. And so we can break that conversation down and have a look at it. And a good place to start is all the positive influences that are taking place in his life. And the big one that we need to be looking at is the sun having this relationship over here to Mars and Pluto in Taurus in the 6th house, and then over here to Saturn. Now, Mars and Pluto in Taurus in the 6th house is an incredibly hard-working indication. It gives him an immense amount of drive and immense amount of will to get things done and make things happen. And similarly, where the Mars and the Pluto go over to the Saturn, which is the planet of doing, it emphasizes again this real desire to make things happen. Saturn's in the 10th house in Virgo, which is saying he's a bit of a stickler for perfectionism, although can he ever achieve that is a bit of a question. But he's going to be putting in a tremendous amount of effort to make everything he's doing into a practical reality. Now, there's a little aspect between Mars, Uranus, and this and Pluto. And again, this just emphasizes his willingness to work with innovative, creative people, innovative ideas. He's not afraid of being on the edge. Now, we have Jupiter having a sextile to Persephone, with Venus there, which brings him into contact or a willingness to deal with all cultures. He's open to a very wide sector of humanity and can appreciate their standpoint. Now, when we come into the tensions that's in his birth chart, we've got a slightly different story here, in that the Sun, we can see now, has a big tension with Saturn and Uranus. Now, this is often the indicator of the rebel and the revolutionary, the person who's not prepared to accept the limitations of his environment and will fight against any kind of unrealistic abuse of authority. And we can see this in all of his work. He's forever railing against aspects of the orthodoxy and you know, stating his own opinion about things very, very strongly. Now, the Venus is opposing Jupiter, and this is an interesting, extravagant indicator. So it's sort of blowing things a little bit out of proportion, but it's also talks about having fun. That you know, he would have a side that would be very, very playful, and so on. So, you know, the one thing that we do need to look at is down the bottom here, where we have Mercury and Neptune conjunct in Pisces, and it does have a very weak relationship over to the moon, but in classical astrology it would be considered to be unaspected, and if not unaspected, then the moon is opposing Mercury Neptune, and so if it's unaspected, it has a certain freedom in the way that it acts. Now, the Mercury Neptune in Pisces, if you put all the words together, it actually does indicate a very mystical personality and the ability to have a very vivid imagination. And one would say you'd expect these people to be psychic, just naturally very psychic. But the question is, how does he use that psychic potential? Now, the moon in opposition to Mercury Neptune brings about a certain deceptiveness into a personality and a dreamy vagueness that's present as well. And as I say, this can be played out by the women in his life. And I believe this does show up later, especially in the fact he was poisoned by a woman of, you know, was she deranged? We can only guess on that one. But the point was, this is where that sits in that Mercury Neptune. And of course, again, this talks about the mother. And, you know, was the mother somewhat unstable, possibly, or considered unstable? So, yeah, very interesting sort of arrangements of activity there. Yeah. So we need to move on. And what I would like to show is that this is the fifth harmonic activities, and these are what I consider angels. This is where the angels help you and where you function as an angel for others. And it indicates talents that a person has that they don't actually have to put hardly any energy into achieving. So it's like a gift from past life. And what we see here is that the Mercury and Neptune have this aspect over to Jupiter and Uranus. And of course, both of these and Mercury, all of these are planets to do with thinking. And so this would suggest that he has an uncanny ability to find whatever information he wants. And with the Uranus in the 7th house, the appropriate people that he needs at any particular stage in his life would tend to arise. And to me, this particular structure is the basis of his genius, and indicates his ability to have access to all knowledge, and in a sense, his ability to see the truth. When it's in front of him, he can see it. And what we can see with Goethean observation is all we're doing is we're looking at what's in front of us and being able to use knowledge, scientific understanding, but also allow for the imagination to play into those perceptions so that we can see the connections and see the patterns and see the order that's sitting below it. And this is this indicator within his birth chart. Now, the interesting part of this is that this was very, very active in 1924. Now, what we can do is that we're forever trying to get a whole lot of information and break it down into some simple forms that we can observe. And so what we can do is we can get the circle and we can divide it into these 72-degree chunks. So there's going to be 5 of these little slices of cake, and we can put them on top of one another, and then we look through there, and what we find is that anybody that's got a line relating to it from other planets will be sitting in exactly the same place. And we can put that on a graph, and we can then also run over time and see how the planets in the sky are relating to this particular graph. Now, what we're looking in this case is down the bottom here, there's Mercury, Uranus, Jupiter, and Neptune all sitting together again. And what we can see is that through 1923, especially the end of 1923-24, and up to his death, we have Neptune coming in over this. And so this would be stimulating his psychic perception to an incredibly high degree. And then we have, from the beginning of 1924, we have Saturn coming in. And Saturn is this crystallizer. It's the manifester of those visions. And so we can see from this sort of September period of 1923, we have quite a few lecture series on nature. And we have the Four Seasons and the Archangels. Then that's followed in October, November with Man's Symphony of the Creative Word, and another course of lectures called Cosmic and Earthly Activities in Man and Earth, something like that. And then in the June of 1924, of course, we have the agriculture course. Now, interestingly, during this time, he began this whole series of lectures on reincarnation and the karmic lectures. So he's in a sense getting all this spiritual ideas and perception and really bringing it to earth. And this is where we see the agriculture course, that in the middle of this whole process, he gives this very practical set of lectures on how we are to work with the earth. Now, interestingly, he died in the March of 1925, and we can see Jupiter is just starting to come over that at the same time, and the planet Uranus is coming along. And so you could say if he lived beyond the March of 1925, he was in a peak period of his psychic perception. And there's this element in the stories of his deaths in that he was had a lot to do. It wasn't a peaceful death. It was sort of quite a bit of agitation because, of course, he was coming into this peak period of perception. And with regards to this, we need to look at a lecture series that he gave in 1924 to the medical stream called Pastoral Medicine. And in there, he gives this very, very practical image of the 4 energetic bodies and how they all work together. And then when they're out of alignment with each other, you get all these different illnesses. And at the same time, particular spiritual states of spiritual experience. And so it's fascinating, really, that all of this is coming. And he did make a comment in 1924 lectures there that he couldn't tell the story as clearly as what he is telling it now, for various reasons that people weren't sort of ready to hear it this clearly, and that he had to put the story of theosophy in the language of theosophists. And so it's a much more complicated story than what he gives in 1924. So he's really cutting it down to the essential truths during this period. And you know, this is where we're seeing these influences. Now, it's interesting to see that in that middle of 1924, we've got Jupiter moving over the Mars and the Pluto and Chiron. Now, Mars and Pluto, as we've said, are very practical indicators in his birth chart, and Chiron is the healer. So this Jupiter coming in during this time is giving this very strong impulse to bring knowledge about the practical application of how we can heal the earth. So this is all indicated here in those 5th harmonics. Now we can look at the 3rd harmonic as well for this period of time. There's actually quite a bit of social activity going on there, which you could say that biodynamics is a social movement. There's definitely a bunch of people who are focusing on that these days. And I'd just like to point this out as we go through, that this is the 4th harmonic. So this is those red lines. And so this is where we see the Sun and Uranus and Saturn all sitting together. So this is his sort of revolutionary urge here that can be looked at. Okay, so this is the game we're going to play with the agriculture course. And when we come to the agriculture course, you can see there's a lot of lines in here. And that's why I wanted to just run through the process once, so that we can have a look at how all of those lines are working together. Now, when we come to this chart, it's basically exactly the same: Earth in the middle, planets, and the eastern horizon on the left. And what we have here is that the Sun is in Gemini in the 10th house, and the Moon is in Leo, and then we have a Virgo rising, with Saturn being the rising planet. Now, you can see in the lines there's lots of blue lines, quite a few red lines, and even some of these light blue lines. Now, the Sun in Gemini is a very interesting place to have this, because Gemini is an intellectual place. It's a place where ideas are communicated and shared, but it's classically the twins. And so it's very interesting to see that in biodynamics today, we have these various streams of biodynamics that are taking place. And in one way, we've got Rudolf Steiner's story of energetic activities taking place in agriculture, which we can call a spiritual science. But then we actually have this whole stream in biodynamics that really wants to make it a material science and keep it very simple. And so, focusing on biodynamics as an organic science. So there's plenty of biology and activity going on, and we can say that Einfried Pfeiffer sort of really helped this, and Dr. Kopf helped that process, Bockemühl to some degree, where there's all this attention on getting the physical science of biodynamics together and sorted out. And this is very good work. But we've got to realize that a lot of that emphasis has sort of taken away from the true energetic activity that stands behind all this material matter. And so in some ways we can see this potential to split the movement between what we might consider a very materialistic biodynamics and an energetic biodynamics. Now, that energetic biodynamics, of course, can also be diverted by what I call anthroposophical agriculture, where we're focusing on the anthroposophical Christian story rather than on the real energetic story. So there's this interesting sort of split personality that's able to form in the Gemini. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Now, the moon in Leo is a very interesting placement. It does sit in the 11th house. And so it does give an orientation towards the cultural and societal good that biodynamics can bring. But moon in Leo does also sort of talk about people's individual view of things, that they can take a very strong sort of personal opinion about stuff. Now the moon is also moving into Neptune, and Neptune plays a very interesting part in all of this story, of course, because Mercury Neptune in Rudolf Steiner's birth chart, but we can see in this chart there's a red line between Mercury and Neptune, and also Mars. So that same tendency to have a very strong imagination and for there to be delusion in the biodynamic movement is very strong. And we can see with the moon moving on to this structure that it's something that we have to look at very strongly. The airy-fairy, deluded, unclear stories that can arise. Now, again, the Virgo rising tends to give us a desire for us to express ourselves in a very defined manner and to get the details quite precise. And at the same time, with Saturn rising, it gives a very conservative view to the world. So there is this effort to try and appear normal, that's sort of implicit, but let's see how that works out. Before we move on, we can have a look at the heliocentric position of the birth chart. I won't go into this a great deal. I just want to point out a couple of features. And one is this light blue feature here with Mars, Saturn, and Neptune. This is indicating a tremendous ability to get spiritual ideas and bring them into a physical structure, a physical manifest form. We can see the Earth and Jupiter here in Scorpio having a relationship to Persephone, which does augur well for an international community. We do need to look at the Mars opposed Pluto, which gives a very strong drive to make things real. However, they can be a bit impulsive. And again, we have Mercury opposed Neptune. So this is a third Mercury-Neptune indicator in these charts. And again, this indicates some level of deceit, deception, delusion, misunderstanding showing up here. The Mercury onto the Pluto, however, gives a desire to clarify that and to make things right. Nevertheless, there is quite a strong deceptive element through all these charts. Now, this big triangle here is very good because that's Earth, Jupiter, Neptune, Chiron, and that gives this potential for healing and a positive, compassionate attitude towards the task at hand. So there's a very strong sort of giving quality in this chart. Now, it's quite a fascinating little story if we look at the beginning of the chart and then we look at the end of the course. And I'm just looking at the beginning of lecture 8 here, where we might look at the very end of the course as well. I can't quite see the timing, but so what we've got going on is, of course, not much is going to move. Now, one of the things that moves is the sun. And in the birth chart of the course, we've got this Mars-Saturn trine going on that we'll talk about. And this brings about a strong practical emphasis to the course, that it needs to function in a very practical way. And we can see that by the end of the course, that the sun has moved from 16 degrees Gemini to 25 degrees Gemini. And this brings it in a very exact trine to Saturn and also a little wider to Mars. And so we can then see that this comes off to the North Node, which is, of course, a destiny point. And so it's indicating that the end of the course has this tremendous focus on practical function. And of course, this Chiron is healing. So the practical healing effect of all of the information he'd given us. Now, the other thing that happens is that we've got Mercury sitting here, and in the birth chart, it's onto the Mars and onto the Neptune. And as I say, this shows up as a dreamy, idealistic, deceptive influence, a little bit unfocused possibly as to where to really go. But by the end of the course, that Mercury starts to form light blue lines to Neptune and Uranus over to Saturn. And this also indicates the ability to be very perceptive and use a good level of intuition in the way that we work with biodynamics. The other thing that's worth looking at is the moon, because we have the moon sitting over here, as I say, not particularly happy, a bit playful, but not particularly happy. And it moves during the course. First of all, it comes, as we can see, all the way around to Jupiter. And so it does that arc, and it's very interesting that when we come to the 5th lecture, which is on the 13th of June, we can see that the moon is sitting here with Saturn, and that has a very good relationship over to the sun, over to Mars, over to the North Node here, and Chiron. And in a sense, what this is saying is that the 5th lecture is where he gives us all of the preparations that are going to act as the tools that we need to bring about the physical activities that he's suggesting. And so very interesting placement of timing here. And then, of course, when we come to the end of the chart, the end of the chart, we come to this Moon-Jupiter conjunction here, which is quite a positive, optimistic, broad horizons, and Yahoo, let's get on and do something with all this. So the ending of the chart is much more focused, of the course, is much more focused than the beginning. And so it's, you know, there's a whole discussion that can go on about just how much this course was predetermined by Elizabeth Vrede. And, you know, that in itself is a discussion that can be had. Now, when we come to the birth chart here, we can again break it down into these groups of planets. And so in this chart, we're going to be looking at the blue lines, all the positive activity. And as we can see, there's quite a few of those. We can look at the planetary discussions here. And what we're looking at, first of all, is the big rectangle that we have sitting in the middle of this chart. And so we're looking at Neptune and the moon here, Chiron, Mars, Saturn sitting over here. But we can also see that there is this line off here to the sun, off to Chiron as well. And it sort of also has a small relationship over this way. Now, the point is that this is a very practical group of planets. This is the big practical vision of wanting to use spiritual and energetic influences to heal the planet and heal agriculture. So this is, you know, a very positive picture of the potential and the practical value that's going to come out of this. Now, the second triangle that we're going to look at here is the one that has Uranus and this is actually Pallas Athene, an asteroid here, and that comes across here to Venus and Persephone, and also Pluto gets sort of drawn into that, and then that goes over to Mercury up the top here. And what this does, of course, is that it brings about a very active intelligence into this whole process. The Mercury, Uranus, Persephone, Pallas Athene, they're all intellectual planets. They're all talking about the need for us to use our intelligence and our mind to look at all of this information that he gives us. It's good information. And at the same time, the Venus Persephone does sort of talk about the international community that can carry on this discussion that's taking place here. Now, the other thing that we can look at while we're going on past here is this light blue structure that's taking place. And this has this Uranus and Pallas Athene coming over here to the moon and then down here to Saturn. And interestingly, that is a little bit of a stroke of genius in there. Moon, Uranus, Pallas Athene talks about the ability to have sudden insights and to be able to look at a broad horizon in the thinking. And then the Saturn, of course, allows that to focus onto a physical manifestation. Now, what this can do, of course, is it can indicate points of sudden breakthroughs in understanding, in practice, in the world's appreciation of biodynamics, and so forth. So you know, there's a lot of sort of potential sitting within that structure. Now, we then go on and have a look at this structure here. These are the tensions that I mentioned, and I've given them a sort of number series. So the first one, the first red one, which I've called the curse, is really this Mercury, Mars, Neptune, North Node, and bringing in the moon aspect here. Now, this can very easily in a personality be considered an aspect of here, there, everywhere, but nowhere. So there's lots of ideas, lots of potentials, lots of imagination, and in a sense, a bit of a scattered application of those. And so with the Mars, too many possibilities, too many options, everything's this big idealism, and can we actually do anything with that anyway? And this, in some way, is supported by this next group of planets, which is the Sun coming on to the Jupiter-Uranus, coming over here to Jupiter, Pallas Athene, Uranus, Sun. And so this is a very, how would you put it, expansive, adventurous, knowledge-based approach to life. You've got the Sun-Jupiter opposition, which is an extravagance, everything's blown out of proportion, but it's also this spirit of discovery that's present here, and that this does bring about this desire to use quite an elevated thinking process, but it also indicates that one needs to have a very lateral and multidimensional understanding of biodynamics. And this is what the Jupiter, Uranus and Pallas Athene square indicates, that we have to be able to look at all the different layers and all the different angles that we approach this. Now, I can make a little bit of a comment here that I have all of these planets in my birth chart as tensions. And so if you look at my explanations of biodynamics, this is what we're getting. I'm presenting a very multi-layered, multi-dimensional, interactive process that we have to be able to grasp. And it's about how do we break down all those little bits and then put them together into this quite complex three-dimensional picture. And this calls for a very active thinking. And this is where it sits in the birth chart here. Now, if we add that to the Mercury, Mars, Neptune, we're getting to the state of anything's possible here. We've got all sorts of big ideas and big dreams, and we've got a huge philosophic sort of background that we can use, not only anthroposophy, but also the astrology, medicine, music and art, and all these different influences that can be drawn into the understanding. Now, the third structure that we have as a tension is Saturn, Persephone, Venus, Ceres, and also Chiron. We don't have Ceres on this chart, but we do have Venus, Persephone, Saturn, and Chiron. Now, Saturn coming on to Venus is classically indication of feeling unloved, unappreciated, and unacknowledged. And when we've got Persephone in on that, this starts happening on an international level. And with the Chiron, this is what needs to be healed. And so there is this potential for quite a bit of division within the international community, and people feeling left out, people feeling misunderstood, and we can see in the way in which the anthroposophical communities work is that there is this element of just deny these people exist and don't take any notice of them. And it's a very interesting tension. However, the positive side of this tension is that, of course, this can talk about an international group of friends who develop over quite a long period of time to work towards the healing of the earth. And so this can actually indicate a very positive long-standing community. However, we do have to acknowledge that there is this tendency to deny the existence of certain people in our environment. Now, okay, we basically can then, look at these things as a group and activity. This is nearly bringing us to an hour, and I think we could say we should probably just end this as the first part of this talk. And there's a whole lot more in the PDF that I have put in there that you can look at and refer to. And one of the things is that we can start to look at how these planets were functioning through the course itself, and then we can actually look at the heliocentric picture of the chart, and then we can, of course, look at how the planets have moved over these birth charts through time. But I would say let's leave that for another time and just have the this birth chart as the beginning of a talking point. Each of those structures that I've outlined and indicated can be looked at in more depth, more discussion, and of course every tension can be used in a positive way. So, but one of the highlights that have keep popping up in this whole story is the role of the Mercury-Neptune. And I should comment that the people who tend to be leading lights in the biodynamic movement have very strong Neptunes. And so it's very interesting to see that you need quite a good imagination to be able to build the pictures that Rudolf Steiner is providing and then get them into motion to see how they all work together. So, yeah, this is a start. Let's use this as the beginning of the conversation, and we can look at many, many aspects of things from here. So I'll leave it at that and say thank you very much for watching. Hope you found it interesting, and that this has sparked some insights for you.